be a preacher sometimes, you know what I'm saying? That's what I think.
18.
Ready?
Yep. I want to welcome those who will be joining us via YouTube whenever you see this video. This is the Morehead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying through the book of Judges, and we are still in Judges chapter 18. And I want us to recognize that this is material here that is known in chapter 17 as appendices to the book, which means there's extra material here that wasn't inserted during the time of the Judges, and the author is not really concerned about putting it with whatever judge it fell under, but really just sort of putting these last few chapters, chapters 18 through, or chapter 17, I should say, through 21, to really show us that spiritual dysfunction of the nation. And in chapter 17, verse 6, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes." If you hold on to that as you're going through the last of these chapters, then you will not ask the same questions that is easy to ask, is why are these people all messed up? Why are they doing things that are contrary to the law of Moses? What are they thinking having idols in representation of God? Why are they not being committed to really the teachings that God gave to the Israelites through Moses? This sort of helps you to see, as the author is intending, that spiritual dysfunction of this fledgling nation. Remember, this is known as Judges as the Dark Ages of the time of Israel.
They've been rejected of God. Right?
Yep, they're just in really a bad way during this time. And not that when they had the kings, it was a lot better. It was in the beginning when they had a united kingdom, but there was lots of struggles after that. But this is sort of a dark period in the history of the nation.
But they're practicing things they know that they shouldn't.
That's right.
Thank
So
God.
they're busy sort of living for God as they see fit in their own eyes. And when you do that,
That's a market fact.
if you do that in those times, you're not living in harmony with God's will. If you do that in our times and you're not committed to the will of God, in other words, whatever God says in His Word, that's His will, we've got to be committed to do that, or we could essentially be accused of the same thing, where we sort of do some of what God wants, and then we do whatever we think is right in our eyes, even if it's contrary to the will of God. We want to make sure that we don't fall in that same trap as they did. Okay, so I'm going to reread the first 5 verses of chapter 18. Actually, the first 6 I'm going to read, and then we'll pick up in verse 6. So we got through the first 5, and we're going to pick up in verse 6. It says, Judges 18, beginning verse 1, "In those days there was no king of Israel, and in those days the tribe of Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in, for until that day inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. So the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said to them, 'Go search the land.' And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. When they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of a young man, the Levite, and they turned aside there and said to him, 'Who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here?' And he said to them, 'Thus and so has Micah done to me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest.' They said to him, 'Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be prosperous.' The priest said to them, 'Go in peace. Your way in which you are going has the Lord's approval.'" And so what we had, I'm not going to go through all of the full explanation of what I've done earlier in the chapter, is you have these Danites. They have their allotted territory, but they have a lot of their land is occupied with Canaanites, and essentially there's not enough room for the whole tribe in that place. They're sort of forced into the hills, And so what they do is they send out sort of an expedition to explore within the promised land, a place where they can start a colony for the Danite citizens. In other words, they can go somewhere else and they can really take a colony there, and people can go there, and essentially they're going to have more room to spread out. And so that's what this is about. So they send the 5 spies, they're on their way to do that, and they come across Micah. Remember the house of Micah? We read all about that in chapter 17. Remember he's got those idols that he has, the representations of God, and then at some point Micah is able to recruit a Levite who is a priest, and he becomes the personal priest of Micah, really attending to the worship of God for Micah and his household. And so these 5 spies come across the house of Micah. They come across the Levite. They're wondering why he's there, because Levites normally do not serve one person. They're not served as, they're not like a personal priest. They're essentially tied to the tabernacle in Shiloh, which is in the same area. What is this guy doing here? Now he came from Bethlehem in Judah, and he came up here really looking for somebody that would sort of give him room and board, and that's how he stumbled across Micah. And they're wondering how he got there, so he gives them that explanation about why he got there. And then we have verse 5. It says, "Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we are going will be prosperous." So these spies are going north. I'll get with you real quick. They're going northward. That's where they must have some awareness that that'd be a place for them to spread out. And they're asking him to sort of inquire of the Lord, which, we don't know if he has a Urim or Thummim, which is doubtful, but the idea that since he's a priest, maybe he can solicit the Lord to on their behalf to see if their way will be prosperous. And then the priest says, hey, verse 6, "Go in peace, your way which you are going has the Lord's approval." Now here's the thing. Here's a man that is essentially responsible for the charge of idolatrous type of worship, because they're using images. And he's essentially assured him that the Lord is with you in this venture, which means, how can a man who is at odds with God be able to give that kind of assurance? Brother Ricky, thank you for your patience.
Well, I don't lose my train of thought. They're obviously saying that everything's not in accord with God's word and what they're doing. So they're asking the Levite to inquire of God,
right,
to see if God will help him.
Right.
The way I'm understanding it.
Yep.
And if he helps them, then they'll know he's legit. But if he doesn't, they'll know he's bogus, phony, and stuff. So because he don't fit the Levite, way in God's eyes, So I believe that's why he's asking them inquire of God.
Well, and
So
he's a
we may
priest. But the problem is that the 5 spies are just as bad as the priest. Why? Because they should have went up to Shiloh and talked to a priest where the tabernacle was and said, "Buddy, there's no such thing as a personal priest. There's no such thing as what you're doing here is not what is acceptable under the law of Moses." But you see, when the nation as a whole is a lot of spiritual dysfunction, you have dysfunction with the Levite priest, you have dysfunction with these 5 spies, and the idea is that somehow they think that this guy who is operating in a different manner than what God has laid out is somehow going to be able to tell them
Do you think
a prosperous journey.
that he's thinking in his crooked mind, because there was Moses and there was Aaron?
Yeah.
They were both priests.
Well, Aaron was.
Huh?
They're both brothers, but Aaron was a priest.
Yeah. But I'm just trying to put this together, but the offerings, there was one priest all the time. And so when another one got replaced back in Moses' day.
So you had a high priest, but you had other priests that were busy doing things in the tabernacle
For
themselves.
sacrifice.
Yeah, so the high priest, remember, only went into the Holy of Holies with the Ark of the Covenant one time a year on the Day of Atonement. So you had a high priest and you had other priests.
What's
that
the one
were-
time, that's for sins, isn't it?
Right, the Day of Atonement for the entire nation of Israel. Sister Emma,
So Aaron was a high priest,
he was a high priest.
and his sons were like helpers. Or
Right, so when God chose him, essentially the whole entire priesthood under the Old Testament was through the Levites. So Aaron was a Levite, and his sons were Levites, but you couldn't just be a Levite, you had to be directly related to Aaron within the Levites in order to be a priest.
Oh,
So this person is a priest from all indication. He just can't act in the capacity as a personal priest, and no God-fearing priest would say, "Oh, I see you have images there, and it's in direct,
Yeah,
it's in direct
that's better.
conflict with the Ten Commandments." But hey, who am I? You're going to give me room and board? Sure, let's do it. No,
so he
no,
would take the room and board over God's word, is
Yeah.
what he's doing.
He should have saw those. He should have. First of all, he shouldn't have said, that he would have been a priest. This man, he could have said, "Hey, is there something I can do to work in your field? Do something else? I can't do that. I can only do something
See,
like
we
that."
should do it the hard way, no matter, that's, we get to learn a lesson from that. He's
Yeah.
taking the easy way, we should do it God's way,
Right.
if it's hard or not, you
Right.
know, because,
The priest should have said no, but then Micah shouldn't have been having images made in order to put in a shrine to worship. You see, the spiritual dysfunction goes all the way around.
well, it happened in his family too, his mother did,
Yeah.
and
Yep, and so this is kind of the mess.
it's like a domino effect.
And so I'll get to you real quick, Sister Emma. So what happened here in these appendices, chapter 17 through 21, is the author of the book sort of just matter-of-factly just telling a bunch of things to show us the spiritual dysfunction. But he doesn't comment on say that's so messed up. These guys were sinning here and sinning there and sinning there. His goal is not really to point out all that, which should be obvious. His sense is to sort of record that spiritual dysfunction for those who would be really under the time of a king. Sister Emma.
So this Micah was one of the Israelites.
Right, he was from the tribe of Dan.
Okay, so since Aaron was a high priest and they had to come from him, so how long of time did that last, the tabernacle and all that stuff? Was it a long period of time?
Yeah, it was, and I don't have the dates, but it'd be from the time of the giving of the law, once they realized that they had to set up a tabernacle and make the furniture that goes in there, the Ark of the Covenant, and the bread of table for showbread, and the candlestick. So that would have been going from the tabernacle all the way until really the time of Solomon, when the temple is actually built in Jerusalem. So that's a good period of time. Aaron, of course, and Moses are long gone by this time. So-
So in order to keep that up, they had to be on the Levite of Aaron.
And specifically,
Generation after generation.
right, specifically from the line of Aaron. And so it'd be, Aaron had 3 sons, Gershom.
I didn't get enough students, so I'm gonna get over it.
They had 3 sons, I can't remember them all.
Abihu, Nadab, and
Well, no, they were the sons of one of those, but it was, they had 3 sons, and so they had to come from the line of those, one of those 3
well,
sons.
they were Aaron's sons too, Nadab and Abihu.
Well, they would be his grandsons, really.
No, they're sons. I looked at it, well, back in the Bible, the sons.
Yeah, I would,
Aaron,
yeah,
that
yeah.
was Nadab and Abihu, because I was looking
Those are
at,
sons of Eli, not,
huh?
I think, Nadab and Abihu. Sons of
Um,
Eli.
No.
Yeah,
I'm not Aaron.
I think you just have to look it up, because we're sort of
That's also-
guessing.
Eli.
We're guessing. I'm pretty certain it's not Nadab and Abihu. I believe those are people that came from one of Aaron's sons, so
I'll
it'd be
look it
Aaron's
up.
grandsons.
One night,
But-
because I thought the.
You know
father-
what? If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. But I'm just saying.
It said Nadab and Abihu were the 2 oldest sons of Aaron.
Of who?
Of Aaron.
Of Aaron.
Aaron.
Okay. Well, then I'll own it. I didn't think they were.
According
But-
to Leviticus 10, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the case, and that's the case. Anyway, let's get into verse 6. And this is where the priest, after they asked him to inquire of God, said to them, "Go in peace your way in which you are going, has the Lord's approval." Now, here's the thing about it is if you're not acting in the right capacity with God, in other words, you're involved with idolatrous worship, and you're being this man's personal priest, how can you be so confident that God is going to be with him and give his approval when he hasn't given you approval? And so what I'm saying is he is under the I would say the mistaken belief that since he's a priest, even though he's doing these things, he's somehow able to answer in the affirmative for God, which is very strange. Now, what we're going to find out is that they're going to win that battle when they go to Lachish, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God was behind approval. It could have just been a coincidence. We have no indication, especially if they're living in disobedience to what the Word of God says, that God would essentially assure them that they would have that approval.
I think God's waiting for them to get their heads on straight so they can worship him correctly.
Yeah.
He's giving them time, just like he's the world, God's, people ask why Jesus hasn't come back yet. Well, God's waiting for the world to, come to repentance, and I think that's what this is too, because they totally got it wrong and
Right.
stuff, and God's having patience with
Right.
it.
So, but when we look at this, we should recognize this is spiritual dysfunction here. Okay, Micah, there's dysfunction in what he's doing, the Levite priest and what he's doing, and so he's giving assurances that, hey, God's going to be with you, to men who essentially are going to later steal those idolatrous images and worship them. It's really to show all the spiritual dysfunction. There's nothing here that we can commend any of these people for, because everybody is doing what's right in their own eyes. Okay, and that's what we need to see here. And the commentary, Matthew Henry's words here for this verse really tells us the sheer delusion of the 5 spies of Dan and the young Levite at the house of Micah in terms of acquiring of the Lord. And here, Matthew Henry says that this verse, "See their carelessness and regardlessness of God and his providence, they would not have inquired of the Lord at all if this Levite's mentioning the teraphim he had with him had not put it into their heads. See their ignorance of the divine law, that they thought God, who had forbidden the religious use of graven images, would yet own them in consulting an image and give them an answer of peace. They seem to have had a greater opinion of Micah's teraphim than of God's Urim, for they had passed by Shiloh, and for aught that appears, had not inquired there of God's high priest, but Micah's shabby Levite shall be an oracle to them. He betakes himself to his usual method of consulting his teraphim, and whether he himself believed it or not, he humored the thing so well that he made them believe he had an answer from God, encouraging them to go on and assuring them of success." Verse 6, "Go in peace, you shall be safe and may be easy, for before the Lord, behold, the Lord is your way, that is, he approves it. As the Lord is said to know the way of righteousness with acceptation, and therefore he will make it prosperous. His eye will be upon you for good. He will direct your way and preserve your going out and your coming in." Okay? Unless there's any question about that, we're going to get to the next 3 verses. So, Jenna, do you want to read verses 7 through 10?
Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people who were in it living in security, after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. For there was no ruler humiliating them for anything in the land, and they were far from the Sidonians, and had no dealings with anyone. When they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Ashtaol, their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" And they said, "Arise and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold,
So this Laish is a place, as I mentioned earlier, it's a Canaanite city in northern Palestine. If you have a Bible map of that area, it's going to be far northeastern Naphtali, the territory of Naphtali, on the border of East Manassas. And this is the area essentially that's going to be conquered by the Danites. So they're really talking about that they went there, they're really there assessing really the situation that they have. They found a place that they want to be able to have a colony there. And they're making some statements about here as they give they're talking about of the Sidonians and the quiet secure, for it says, for there is no ruler humiliating them for anything in the land, and they were far from the Sidonians, they had no dealings with anyone. And so the idea of it is this is an isolated city, and it's the idea that it's secure. The Hebrew word here for quiet is translated quiet, New American Standard. The idea here of it's undisturbed of people, it's in peace and security. And it seems to be sort of the same thing. In other words, Sidonians are on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and this is further inland, and it seems as if this is a colony that belongs to the Sidonians, but it is a great distance away from it, okay? And so this is where they're going to go after the unfaithful Levitical priests inquired of the Lord for them. They come to this place, and Leon D. Stancliffe in his God's Messages Bible commentary here on this passage says, quote, the 5 men found that the citizens of Laish were comfortable and secure. They were not concerned about anyone invading, and they did not have leadership which would organize resistance to those who moved there from the tribe of Dan, and they came unto their brethren. And so the idea is that they seem in a pretty isolated area. They weren't really concerned about anybody attacking them. They seemed like we don't really need to have to be ready for any such attack, which seems odd since a lot of that stuff goes on in this area, and maybe it hadn't gone on for a while, at least that part of Palestine, but they felt fairly secure, even though they were a great distance away from Sidonia. Any questions about the text? I did want to mention about the word here, the New American Standard says, for there was no ruler humiliating them, and that is the idea that they didn't have any sort of of leadership there, the idea that they would have to be under this leadership and subject to this leadership. And so it seems somewhat very disorganized if that's the case, that they didn't
You're
have,
talking about the leadership of Micah?
of that city of Laish, of those Canaanites living there. They didn't seem to apparently have a king. So they probably had some kind of organization, but they didn't really have somebody that was sort of like in charge and to make sure if they were attacked, you know, that this guy would say, hey, here's what we need to do, and you know, we've got to be doing all these things so that we can repel this attack. So, okay, no questions. We're going to go on to verse 8. It says, when they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, what do you report? So we're talking about these two cities back in the territory of Dan, Zorah and Eshtaol. You remember Zorah is where Samson's family was from. And essentially they're asking spies, okay, what intelligence did you gather as far as this place? What did you find for us? And so they're going to now tell really what happened in terms of their findings. In verse 9 it says, they said, arise and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you sit still, do not delay to go to enter to possess the land. I want you to think about how different these spies in terms of motivating their people compared to the 12 spies that were to go in and spy out the promised land. What do you see as the difference?
They were pretty gung-ho on this one.
Okay, they seem really gung-ho, and the 12 spies, how did that work out? When they came back, they said, we saw, you know, here's some of the fruits of the land, and it is it's a great land, and And what else? What were they telling them?
They're giants.
There's people, they're giants here. We're like grasshoppers in their sight, and essentially the idea is it's like a suicide mission if we go do this, because they're living in fortresses, and they got established armies, and we think it's a bad idea. And of course, remember, 10 of them sort of had that mentality. Only Caleb and Joshua were saying, hey, in spite of all that, God is with us, and we're going to prevail, and that should have been the last thing said. It's like, yep, you're right, guys, let's do it. But these guys are able to bring back the report, and they're giving this. In fact, they seem very much, the idea is let's get with it. There's no time to waste. Let's just jump right in there and let's do this. And so that is their motivation. It's just waiting for us to take it. Let's go. And that's kind
Is
of
that
what
the
we're
tribe
seeing.
of Dan you're talking about?
Yeah, so this is
The tribe of Dan is of God.
right, the tribe of Dan, but they are
And they're
looking.
the ones that found the grapes and all that, right?
They're what?
They're the ones that found the grapes.
Well-
Get of the land.
Well, we're talking about an earlier time before they went to the promised land. This is at a time when they already had the promised land, but this is an expedition by the tribe of Danite within their territory to find some other place that they could start a colony, because they were sort of being pushed out by a more powerful Canaanite people. They were sort of forced into the hills and mountains, and so they wanted to find some other land that they could occupy, because there wasn't enough room in that area that they had left for them to be able to exist.
Yeah.
So this is really them taking the initiative to find a different piece of land for them to go to.
So basically, the tribe of Dan is these other fake people are multiplying, and they need to find a place for safety.
Yeah.
For
So
another-
remember that when they went into the promised land, what were they supposed to do with all the Canaanite inhabitants? Weren't they supposed to kill them, tear
They would
down their
kill them,
altars?
yeah. What
Okay,
happened with
so
that?
that's what I'm saying. So Joshua went in and they did a lot of that, but they weren't done, and it should have continued to be done. And those that they left behind were strong. And instead of the tribe, the Danites within their territory saying, "We got work to do here," let's find a different place to go that we can sort of get, and we can just go there. So it's really within the territory of Naphtali and East Manasseh, right?
I was just gonna say, basically, they got lazy. Instead
Yeah.
of dealing with the problem at hand, they're like, oh,
Right.
we'll deal with that later, and they
Right.
never did deal with it.
So this is
Who
the,
got lazy? The tribe of Dan?
No, we're talking about when they first got into the promised land.
they didn't.
Oh, yeah.
They did.
Guys like they were supposed to.
They didn't make the effort to go in there and conquer until all of the Canaanites
They were afraid
were
of
expelled from the
Joshua
land.
and Caleb when
right. So
and they
sometimes,
found grapes and stuff. Yeah.
right, when they went to assess initially, when they went into the promised land, they received some of the fruits and everything and brought them back. So we're talking at a later time when they should have fought off all the Canaanite inhabitants, being faithful to God, and drove them out, but instead they allowed them to live there and they became stronger. And so the Danites are saying, we got to find somewhere else to go that's going to be easier for us to sort of be. And that's kind
If
of
they
what
went
we
to
see.
that land, they would find more garlic, onions, and leeks,
Yeah.
and melons like they were bragging about in Egypt,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff that they were too scared to go into.
So here's sort of the
Yeah,
problem
yes,
is if you don't do what God says, then that's gonna cause problems. So they
Yeah.
already had a territory that's big enough for them, but if they don't conquer the Canaanite inhabitants, and they say, well, it's just too hard, we're gonna go up here, whose fault is that? It's theirs. Because they should have done what God said. We can sort of see the trouble they're in from looking at their spirituality. They're really out of sync with God. Look at the things that we've been discussing, well, what they're doing. So verse 10 says, when you enter, you will come to a secure people. This is the report here, the 5 spies, with a spacious land. For God has given it into your hand, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth. In other words, this is ripe for the picking. And it's a spacious land. In other words, it's large, has a lot of space. And Arthur E. Kundal and Leon Morris in their Tyndale commentary on Judges in this passage says, of great importance in view of the relatively small fighting force of the Danites, verse 11, was the fact that the inhabitants of the land, secure in their isolation, had taken no precautions against a surprise attack. In other words, they felt like, hey, we got the perfect place. Nobody's going to bother us here. And so as these 5 spies tell the tribe of Dan back home about this area, they are essentially saying, this is exactly what we're looking for. You know, we've looked at it. It looks like it's something that we can take. We shouldn't delay. We should get an army and we should go take this place. Okay, any questions or comments about that? Okay. So they got this impression that God, the part here about for God has given it your hand, of course, from what that Levite had told them, the priest told them that, so they are going forward with that, even though they're not in harmony with God. And so we should sort of learn that just because somebody says something like this, that God is with you, doesn't necessarily mean that they, if they're not faithful to the word, that they're able to say that. In other words, if these were 5 faithful spies of God, they was like, wait a minute, this is coming from a guy who's essentially, is involved with idolatrous worship in a shrine, and is a priest to one man. Who are you? You're not right with God. How can you say such a thing?
Well, you think the Levite wouldn't know these things, you know,
Yeah.
that ran into Micah.
Yeah.
You know, you think he would know that he's practicing discord.
Well, yeah, you'd sort of think that too, but you know.
Well, the Levites were well taught, you know.
Yeah.
They were people that God chose, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, you think of Aaron, and when Moses was
Yeah.
up in the mountain, he's making a golden calf. I mean, yeah, they should have known better.
Moses was on that hill, 40 days?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just think all that time, though. I
Yeah.
mean, that was wrong what they did, but all that time being alone. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is
you gotta stay faithful to God, though.
to stay faithful to God, and somebody should have said, hey, what you want us to build is just like we left the false gods in Egypt. Why don't you realize this is a horrible idea? Because our God, it doesn't look
Yeah.
like the gods of Egypt that God essentially overthrew in terms of the 10 plagues.
Well, that was stupid to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So there's what should have been versus the reality that we're sort of reading here. Let's go on to the next 3 verses, 11 through 13. Brother Ryan, you want to read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then from the family of the Danites, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out. They went up and camped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they called that place Mananadan to this day. Behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. They passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah.
Okay. So, as the Bible writer puts here, they're talking about sort of how things are sort of unfolding. So the report from the 5 spies of Dan was convicting and motivating. And from the 2 cities of Zorah and Eshtaol, apparently they were able to raise an army of 600 men and essentially set out to fight and conquer the city of Laish. Oh, they went up and camped at this Kiriath Jearim in Judah before they called that place Manahan Dan to this day, and it said, behold, is west of Kiriath Jearim. So he's given us sort of the geography of the area, and in my notes here I have from Eshtaol to Kiriath Jearim is a distance of about 8 miles. So the Bible writer appears to use Kiriath Jearim as an approximate location to where the army of Dan actually camped. And this other lesser known place was nearby a city of Kiriath Jearim, but west of it. And so Kiriath Jearim was located just inside the territory of Benjamin, near the western border between Dan and Benjamin. This Kiriath Jearim, according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, is a fortified city. And originally it was assigned to the tribe of Judah and later assigned to Benjamin. And this is the place that the Ark of the Covenant, remember when they went into battle, they weren't right with God, and they took the Ark of the Covenant thinking, we got the Ark of the Covenant, we're going to fight against these Philistines, and essentially they get defeated. The Philistines seize the Ark of the Covenant, and then they open it, they make a mistake, and of course it says they got all these tumors or whatever it was, and they return it. Well, when they do, this is where the Ark of the Covenant was brought back and stayed here for a time at the house of a guy named Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim until the time when David transported the ark to Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6, 2 through 3. This place here says, therefore they call that place Manahem Dan to this day. Behold, as west of Kiriath Jearim is, Manahem Dan means camp of Dan. And it seems like these guys like naming everything Dan. So they're going to go up to this other city. Hey, let's call it Dan. You know, it just seems like. But they're actually naming it after, of course, their ancestor, right? Who was one of the 12 sons of Israel, who received a territory. And it's really done really to honor their ancestor. It says, verse 13, they passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. And so this seems to be intentionally done by the spies because, hey, we remember seeing some things there that we'd like to get. And so they traveled there, and that's where they end up. They come to the house of Micah. Was this just a coincidence, or was this a common travel route going through this area? It seems like when the spies went there, they didn't know it was there, so it might have been a common area as you traveled north into Palestine.
So that sounds like a good, a good trick to use for name places, Dan.
Yeah. You just add different names to it, so you have something Dan. So
Did that trick the people though that was around?
Well, I think it
there?
just sort of showed ownership by the tribe too. You know, it just is the camp of Dan. So if it's camp of Dan, and it's nobody else's camp other than camp of Dan, so this is our camp.
So it was the spies that was doing that. Were the Canaanites?
Well, I don't know. The spies named it that. I think that's the name that it had. Like the tribe itself had a previous time named it the camp of Dan. Yeah, the area camp of Dan.
Because they knew that Dan was the people of God. Or
Well,
did they know that?
Well, but they just, it's just in honor of the, you know, the son of Israel, whose name was Dan. And so it's an area there that, hey, there's an area here, we're gonna call this Camp of Dan. Okay, that works, let's call it that. Okay, so let's do 14 through 20, I think. We may or may not get through all of it, but we can at least read some of it here. Let's just read the first 14 through 17, and we'll kind of go from there. Brian, would you want to read that? 14 through 17?
Then the 5 men who gone to scout out the country of Laish said to their brother, do you know that in these houses there are an ephod, household god, a carved image, and metal image? Now therefore consider what you will do. And they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah and asked him about his welfare. Now the 600 men of Danites, armed with their weapons of war, stood by the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone to scout out the land went up and entered and took the carved image, the ephod, and the household gods, and the metal images, while the priest stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war.
All right. So here we have them coming to that place where Micah's household is. And these 5 spies remember, hey, in Micah's house, there are some idols that we can take from you. Why? Because when there's 5 of them, it's one thing. Now they got 605, plus it seems there's little ones and wives as we read through the chapter that are also with them. And that's why they appeared to be there. They came there to be able to gather those things together. They saw them, they wanted them. Again, this shows us now that the 5 men of the tribe of Dan and the Danite army, the idea is they don't have any problem with it. What we would like to have seen is saying, this guy has idols, we need to go in there and take them and destroy them, and we need to hold this guy accountable. That's not going to happen. They essentially says, those beautiful looking gods you made, we're going to take them and we're going to have them because we have enough men to do it. And so we're going to. And that's what they're going to do, is to gather those things together. So as the 5 spies bring them there, verse 14, it says, now therefore, the spies say to the army, now therefore consider what you should do. And it seems to be that they are planting this in their minds. The New International Version says, now you know what to do. In other words, here we are, and we're here to get something. You know what to do. Okay, so we're going to seize these things and take them for ourselves. They turned aside, verse 15 there, and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him his welfare. And so they get there, they're having a conversation with the Levite there at the gate. And while there's this conversation between the army of Dan and the Levite, 5 spies just go right into the house. They know exactly where to go get the goods, and that's what they do. Verse 16, the 600 men armed with their weapons of war who were of the sons of Dan stood by the entrance of the gate. Verse 17, now the 5 men who went to spy out the land went up and entered there and took the graven image and the ephod and the household idols and the molten image, while the priest stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war. And then it says, verse 18, when these went into Micah's house and took the graven image, the ephod, and the household idols, and the molten image, the priest said to them, hey, what are you doing? And it's interesting, the reply in verse 19. What do you think these guys are saying in verse 19?
We're taking these, something, they don't care
Okay.
what he has to say about it.
I was gonna say, technically, we haven't even read verse 19.
Well, I've read them to you guys. I'm just trying to squeak in what I can here. What is verse 19? Just read it over. What do you think what did they say in there in verse 19?
And here's a better opportunity for you
Yeah.
to use your knowledge and
Yeah.
wisdom and all
Well, I think that's a kinder way of putting it. In other words, the NIV reads, be quiet and don't say a word. Because essentially, we're going to take these. And there's nothing you can do about it. And then it's sort of like the idea is we'll give you incentive. This is the part you're getting at. How much better? This is sort of promotion. Instead of being a one-man priest, you can be, a priest for the whole tribe. Hey, well, these guys could kill me, and if I go along with it, I'm going to go from serving one man and his household to a whole tribe. Hey, that sounds good to me. And so that's kind of what we're seeing there. So the young Levites' protest of their action is not appreciated by these men who have the upper hand of the matter. And essentially, they're telling them, if you know what's good for you, you'll stop with your protest. And we see here that the Danites really justify the theft of property. So here the idea that one of the 10 commandments is we're not supposed to steal. What's going on here? See all the dysfunction?
Yeah.
They're taking it, what they should be doing is confiscating it and then destroying it, but they're actually stealing it. And verse 20, we'll finish with that one. It says, the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod and the household idols and the graven image and went along with people. Hey, this worked out well. And so with a little persuasion, the Levites convinced just to go along with all of it. But it makes us think about his little deal. Remember the little deal he made with Micah? The room and board? What about that deal? What happened there?
Oh, he took the room and board over a bag.
Yeah, it's like, let's see.
God.
Yeah, it's like room and board with Mike. Okay, they're going to come get the household idols. Basically, I'm the one left at home, and I'm responsible for making sure that they stay here. Let's see. Stay, pretty much try to fight against these people and lose and maybe put to death, or, hey, I'll go on to this better deal because they offered me this better deal. And then I'll still have all what I need, and I'll get a promotion. And so that's what it seems like should have happened there. So, any thoughts or questions about that?
You should never take the easier road. You took the high
Right.
road,
Right. So
God's way. So.
right. So the priest didn't have any you know, in terms of his ethics wasn't very good either. I mean, we have lots of dysfunction all the way around, and every time we go a verse or two, we see more dysfunction. That's what we should see here, and none of it makes sense in light of when you have read the law of Moses and you compare it to it. It's just a lot of people doing things that they thought was right in their
Well,
lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how, denominationism.
Yeah.
Creep into the Lord's church,
Right.
especially more people, bigger congregations, more people baptized, we try to bring in
Right.
influence, what they like and feelings, and
Yeah.
we have enough people murmuring, leadership has not, stand on truth and lose half the congregation, or
Right.
appease everybody and
Right.
use the numbers, and that's how
Yeah.
small things creep in.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Ricky, you had something, or?
Yeah, this kind of goes in hand what he was saying, but one sin leads to another, you know.
Right.
You should always, no matter how hard it is, choose to do the right thing. And sometimes it's hard to do that.
Yeah, it's always hard to do the right thing, but it's always better. In other words, if you guys are gonna go into idolatry, then why bother to worship God at all? I mean, because you're essentially, you're not doing it God's way. God isn't gonna bless you. You know, if you would have just been faithful to God and had trusted God, you could have fought off all these Canaanites in your territory. But you know, if you're not gonna pay attention to anything God says, then here's what you have left. So
Don't be yoked under the bondage of sin
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Scripture I read yesterday, so, gonna watch, the devil, 'cause he's
Yeah.
always trying to find your weaknesses.
sure. I want to thank those who are watching the video. God bless you. As we study through the book of Judges, our goal is to understand the text and make applications so that we can benefit from sort of seeing the mistakes and the errors of those who were God's people in the past time, so that we can examine that and make sure that we are not guilty of the same kind of errors of judgment and lack of commitment in our time in relation to the new covenant. Thank you and God bless.